Hi, everyone. My name is Krithika. I serve as the Assistant Director for Academics at IC3 Institute. And today we just wanted to have a really important and interesting conversation about research and its role in career and college counseling and the Student Quest research that we've just kickstarted and really how that's going to have a significant impact on the way that we approach counseling and scale the type of support and the quality of support that we can provide to our students as well. To get us started, I just want to introduce my co-host for today, Ratish. Over to you. Maybe you can hear a little bit from you and then we can pick up our conversation from there.
Thanks, Krithika. Hi, guys. I'm Ratish. I'm an academic manager and a research lead at IC3 Institute. I'm very excited to talk about something really important. And I think through this conversation, we can really build that bridge between what we're trying to do at the Institute through our research and how it's linked to counseling and why that's important a little bit. So over to you, Krithika.
Thanks, Ratish. I think the intent to do this podcast and this conversation came up because we were discussing an example of a student's experience a couple of weeks ago. And this is a student I know quite well. She's got a very inept, sort of aptitude for design, someone that likes to spend her free time doing not just artwork, but like innovative artwork that's towards problem solving. And it's somebody who's also just intelligent in a way that she understands how to bridge different elements together to solve a problem. And while she's, academically doing quite well too, in conversations with her family, it became very clear that they were extremely keen on her to get certified under the, chartered accountancy certification or the ACCA certification. And when we got to understanding why, it was a lot of the parents' apprehension of, okay, I think if they do the ACCA, there's going to be more guaranteed security in terms of, her establishing herself with a successful career, stable income, all of those things. And they felt like a field like design might be more volatile and unpredictable, more competitive, and all of those perceived ideas about the design sector. And what I found interesting is that all of the examples that they gave were either based on the parents' personal experience or the experience of the people in their immediate network. And none of it was by looking at, data from, let's say, leading industry reports that are published by McKinsey or PwC or IBEF to just say what is the projected growth of that industry going to look like in a couple of years? What are the number of institutions that exist in this space? What is the acceptance rate amongst them? What are the prerequisites for it? It was not a conversation. It was so experiential. Have you seen conversations like this in your time of counseling students from different schools in the country? And can you share a little more about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that was a big part of my life as a private counselor was also counseling parents and understanding why they're thinking that a particular field is better for their kid while their aptitude is not towards that field. Now, someone who's in design may not like the sort of repetitive, boring nature that could be sort of associated with accounting, and also the fact that it has a very different set of examinations. It's isolated. It's not in a university setting. Knowing all of those factors will help make a better decision for the student as well. And usually those factors are not considered as easily as you might want them to. And the sort of advice is based on traditional advice. My family friend's son who is, 10, 15 years older than you did the same thing. Now look at him, he's successful. But the world changes. It changes so rapidly, it changes so dynamically that we can't really predict whether something that is 15 years ago relevant is relevant right now in the world or not. So I think one of the biggest things is that, with the growth of technology and artificial intelligence, what is happening to these fields? What is the changes that are taking place? And I think that's very important for us to understand, figure out, like you said, read reports from PwC, and Coursera releases multiple, skill reports for every year where you can figure out what are the top 10 skills. World Economic Forum does the same thing. And through that, understand in the next 5-10 years, what are the important skills and whether they align with what the subject and the field that you're asking your kid to do or asking the student to do. So I think that those experiences come very often. And it's always very difficult to do it because safety and security is more important. And those decisions are made. And yes, in design, has been in the past looked at as a non-paying field, but more and more with marketing agencies coming up and more need for design language, even in careers in, let's say, social impact or elsewhere, even within big four companies. You need people who can, think or have design thinking skills and are able to present information. So this sort of information needs to be first figured out, and then maybe that career decision should be made. And yeah, that's pretty much it. But I would like to also sort of, bring that focus back to why it's important to just go and look at what the world is seeing before we make the decision. There is some merit in understanding why the world is changing dynamically and what are those changes and what is bringing those changes. So I think with that idea, advice can be much more, precise. It can actually help students not make errors in decision making. They can give them more confidence as well. Because it's the age of information, you can find any information online. It's just easier to access it, and I don't see why we shouldn't do that on a regular basis, especially in career counseling, which could save maybe a couple of years for a student who realizes when he's 21, 22 that he doesn't want to do accountancy. So those sort of changes are really, really, really important, and to understand that is also really important.
No, yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think what's interesting is also everything that you said about the approach to the process, right? In a counseling office setup, when a parent and a student are coming with the same kind of apprehensions as we just discussed in that case study, when
Yeah,
they come into the conversation, now, there is an onus on the counselor to be equipped with knowledge and information about multiple careers and multiple pathways, which is not even realistic, right?
yeah,
Nobody is Google or Wikipedia. You're not going to be able to keep up with that kind of rapid change in industry trends and have that knowledge at the tip of your fingers.
yeah, yeah,
Instead, if it's a culture to
yeah,
know how to do selective research about industry trends and incorporate that findings in your counseling conversation, whether it's at home with between a student and a parent or in the school with all of the stakeholders involved, that is a very important shift I think that we need to bring.
yeah,
And I find it interesting that it's also a cultural shift that we have to create, because there is somehow so much more comfort in knowing that someone has had an experience that might be positive and credible for them,
yeah,
and that's probably why it's a good reason or pathway to take it,
yeah,
than look at a situation and say, okay, it worked out well for that person,
yeah,
but will it work well for me? And what are the other, stumbling blocks or factors that could or may not create a positive experience for me if I opted for the same path?
right,
And I think that shift in culture is such an important one that we would need to bring,
yeah,
which then brings me to sort of my next, segue, which is the Student Quest report is really the first of its kind in trying to eliminate any assumptions and trying to find the voice of the student, the voice of the counselor, and get down to, at a very foundational, raw, and fundamental level, what is the thought process.
yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about the survey process itself and like why people should participate in this and how it's going to help them?
No, absolutely. I'll give you an example from last year's report where we had three stakeholders that we took the survey with. One was parents, one was school counselors, and one was students, obviously. And so we asked them all whether gender makes a difference in the kind of careers that they will choose. And you could automatically tell the discrepancy in thought, because there was students saying, no, I don't think gender influences the kind of careers I want to take. Parents said that gender does actually influence careers, and there are certain careers that girls can do and girls can't do, or boys can do and boys can't do. And then counselors come in where they give that reasoning that parents give when students are picking those careers. So they do consider factors like safety of, let's say, the city that they're going to or the university, and then sort of make that decision whether that career path makes sense or not. So it's not actually related to the career, it's related to other aspects and other factors. And that's an interesting piece of information, right? And you may never have that conversation, which is between counselors, students, and parents, to find this discrepancy. And that's why the student first report is so important, because it does that. It asks very targeted questions to stakeholders, and they ask the same question almost, like there's slight changes to it, but it's a very similar question that is being asked to both stakeholders, to all stakeholders, in fact. And from that, we're able to sort of extrapolate information on a very basic level. It's just very simple quantitative knowledge that we're gaining. But these yes or no answers can give so much insight into how parents are thinking, how students are thinking. Students are coming in with the mindset in your generation that, gender is equal and that we don't need to have careers which are gender based. Whereas parents are coming in from that traditional mindset where they do feel like certain careers are going to be gender based. But that gap or that clash that is there, that conversation never comes out in the open. And it may be stuck to maybe a parent and a student having that conversation, a parent and a child having that conversation in the confines of their home. But now with this report, we're able to tell that. And what it does with counselors as well is that it prepares them for the kind of questions a parent can ask. And I think that's important. Like you were saying, right? There are so many careers, there are so many colleges in the world. Counselor can't know everything, right? But what we can do with, and especially what Student Quest tries to do is that it gives you insights into your counseling practice. And I think that enriches the way you give advice, not just to students, but to parents and to other stakeholders as well. So that's why it's important. That's why it's important to participate. And you will see themes that we explore in Student Quest in 1 year come back as an entire new theme, trying to answer and find out those questions again within the next year. So one of the most important ones was last year we realized, apart from the economic benefit that a career can provide, students are looking for careers which align with their personal values. And that's important to know, right? Like, and it's steadily increased. It was not as important of a factor maybe a couple of years ago, before COVID, but now it's become an important factor. But and then it begs the question whether students understand what their personal values are, do they understand what their passion is, what their purpose is, and can you define these things as a student, and then make that choice. So, and this is what we're doing in this year's report is that we're only focusing on counselors and students, but we have taken that learning from the last year's report and put this into, you know, as a thing that we have to find out in this year's report. Do students understand passion, purpose? Do counselors understand passion, purpose? Extremely important, whether they are able to give advice based on the knowledge of how students perceive these two terms and how you perceive these two terms. And that discrepancy within age groups always exists, like you were saying with the girl, with gender-based courses or gender-based careers. So that discrepancy always exists, and it's good to bring that out and have that conversation out in the open.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think it's fascinating because what you talked about in terms of, the pulling on threads that we would not know because they would not be overt conversations like the gender discrepancy or perceived difference between choosing economically stable options versus purpose and passion driven careers. And just the fact that we don't know how to quantify these things. But if you had that combination of looking at a research report to say, okay, these are the things that the student is expressing as, their perceived understanding of passion and why it's important to them, or why they wouldn't feel any kind of, hesitance in pursuing careers that don't just drive economic stability.
Yeah.
And then combine that with the student's profile, the circumstances, and then draw from any other personal experiences also, because we don't want to discount that.
Yeah.
If you combine that process, it's going to be incredibly impactful, which is something that I really want to put out as a notion for us to encourage in consistent counseling practices. But that being said, what you talked about with passion and purpose right now is so important because, like I said, this is a very hard thing to quantify.
Yeah.
It's something that we throw around very abstractly in conversation to say, yes, everybody should be doing a thing that they're passionate about and it should align with their purpose. So it impacts all other areas of their life positively. But what does it mean to get there?
Yeah.
Like you said, do students understand what it means? Do they know how to measure it for their personal success to what opportunity, like their personal qualities to what exists in the world of work, to align the two and say, okay, yeah, this is my passion or this is my purpose. Do they know how to do that? And does the counselor have an understanding of what is the student's capability to assess it, to then be able to support them the right way with the right tools and techniques?
Yeah.
So I think this is such an important gap. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one.
No, it's a very important thing. And to build on that further, right? You may have a passion, but you may not want to convert that into a career. And that's again a misconception that has come out from, let's say, in the past few years in social media, and you've seen people doing what they want and earning money from that. It's not always the case. And that sort of distinction in maybe what a profession is and what a passion passion-based activity or thing can be separated. And I think that advice, it cannot be either you follow something which is professionally stable or you follow your passion and why can't we have a combined advice that comes from that? And so I think it's very important to, get those nuances out through these quantitative studies and through this research so that we're able to look at a kid and okay, maybe he likes to play music, but he doesn't want to, giving him an advice or go become a music producer or go do all of those sort of like become a music engineer if they've taken the sciences. Maybe they don't want to do that. Maybe they just want to play the guitar for what it is. That's their passion and doesn't need to convert into a career. So I think that's those sort of conversations come into play when we have numbers, we have an idea of what students think, and it just helps you as a counselor how to take that conversation forward. And it's a very simple, basic, straightforward report. We have data points, we show those graphs, we place those ideas or place those findings within global sort of knowledge and present that information in a way where it becomes a recommendation. And we do have a recommendation section at the end of the report, which not only focuses on counselors, schools, but we also look at government policy level changes or universities and how they can improve certain practices to aid students and to aid counselors. So I think there is just so much value in participating in this and getting maybe a few responses that really bring out nuances that we've not thought about before.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I think I wanted to touch on is also one of the aspects of the report is also finding information about things like how much comfort does a student have in approaching a counselor to have a conversation? Are there apprehensions? Do they find that the one-on-one counseling process is as effective as it could be?
Right.
And these are data points that we don't always find because schools may or may not have a feedback and impact assessment mechanism in place to see whether the existing services being provided are really hitting home with the students or not.
Yeah.
And this is a great way for the school to be able to reflect and see, okay, when we are providing this type of service and support to this is their perceived takeaways from it, because this is not graded, this is not assessed or evaluated in any way. So students' responses have so far been quite organic and honest in being able to provide as authentic a data set about this as possible. And then we can layer it with also understanding the counselor's point of view on how they feel like the support services are being received, understood, and processed by the student. And this kind of feedback loop is not necessarily structured in place yet. So the report can serve as an incredible way to understand the efficacy of the counseling process itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we're talking, sorry, please go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's a great point because I think counseling practices need to evolve and improve constantly. And I think the report really aids in that process quite well. Sorry, I can't.
Yeah, completely agreed. And I just wanted to pull on a thread that we talked about very briefly in the previous section, but just wanted to highlight a little because we've had the experience of facilitating sessions around this in the cohort. And one of the interesting things is personal values as a metric to find passion.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating one because when you look at even a student being assessed to identify their core competence, things like aptitude, personality, multiple intelligence, skills, all of these things come up first and quickly, which are important, but also cerebral. But I think personal values as a factor is a little bit more longitudinal because it's things that are very core and integral to a person and usually things that don't shift very drastically. So it creates the most sort of buy-in or commitment for the student to stick through adversity if they were to make choices based on personal values rather than something else. So I think that is going to be a really important factor to look at. And I find that it's interesting because we've included it in the survey as a point of understanding. And I find it interesting that counselors themselves sometimes struggle to be able to reflect because when you give them a vocabulary list and they find your values and they do, and then they reflect on whether they're really living by it or not, they see that may not always.
Right.
So it's the survey even turns into a reflective process for a self-assessment of seeing where are you at in your own personal journey and then aligning it towards, appropriate decision-making processes.
Absolutely. And it also places you within what a global set of counselors are thinking. and where you fall within those categories. So it's just a fascinating sort of study to figure out where you are within the counseling practices. And I think that really is beneficial. And like, in terms of personal values, personal values also change as you grow, and as your experiences become more as a student and as a kid, you start to change those, it becomes more and more dynamic. Um, and you do recognize something, maybe right, wrong, whatever the way you want to sort of interpret that personal value or the lens through which you are perceiving the world. Um, but you sometimes, like you said, you're not practicing, and we just don't realize that you're doing. You can say that you are doing XYZ things, and these are very important to your personal values. But if those things are not converting into action, that can sometimes feel a little bit incomplete, or feel like it's demotivating or demoralizing. And it's very important to sort of think about those things and reflect. And I think reflection is a big part of the report. Like, you do read this and you get a good sense of what's happening, not just what you are experiencing, but what, even as a student globally, what students are experiencing, as a counselor, what globally counselors are experiencing. So that's really fascinating. And it's a reflection-based report. And I really do enjoy the process quite a bit of building that survey out, and, figuring out which questions will make sense and how that will give us certain key points and factors. And so it is a fascinating experience. And I think everyone should participate in that, and participate heavily, share it with their network, because I think that's really good. I think you get really good findings, and there's no study like this that is taking place in the world right now on a global scale. So I think participating in that and finding out where you are globally is very